Since the late 20th century, the world of business has been enamored with the world of sport. Sporting metaphors, approaches to planning, and most of all, personal success stories have been seized upon by business leaders and writers, looking to add some human interest and relatability to their otherwise rather dry lessons for business. So we look to learn from the boys in the boat about teamwork, or read Bill Belichick's 5 Lessons for Innovators, or understand management theory as practiced by the Barcelona Football Club. But the challenge with taking this approach, whether you're writing about the secrets of success or trying to live them, is that sometimes the sports people being celebrated as inspiration turn out to have deeply flawed personal lives. A business author writing today about excellence and focus will no longer turn to stories of Tiger Woods' detailed preparation after his image nosedived in 2009 with revelations of multiple extramarital affairs. And I still remember reading a business book that opened with a compelling story of athletic resilience and courage, of a cancer survivor fighting back to dominate his sport. But the inspiration immediately evaporated as the so-called legend turned out to be Lance Armstrong, and the success being acclaimed was fueled by drugs and not determination. All too often, our heroes have feet of clay. Which is the case with our first reading today, a story so tawdry and scandalous that you may wonder what it's doing in the Bible at all. David, the cherubic boy hero who felled the giant Goliath when grown men feared to face him in battle. King David, the leader of Israel, who survived the petulant, changeable temper of Saul, the celebrated writer or muse of many psalms. This pinnacle of Old Testament legend turns out to have the sexual mores of Tiger Woods and the self-restraint of Aaron Hernandez. There's nothing in this story that puts David in a positive light. I mean, where do you start? It was the time of year, we are told, when kings go out to battle. Except David hadn't. David sent his armies to risk their lives against the enemy, while he stayed safe at home. Then one lazy afternoon, David is idly wandering around his palace when he spies a beautiful woman. She's someone else's wife, but that doesn't bother David. Bathsheba is sent for and taken. And when he faces the revelation of his greedy and unrestrained lust, David turns from one desperate and blundering plan to another, frantically trying to conceal his disgrace. The rape of a blameless woman, the murder of a faithful man, the leader who had more wealth and power than any of his subjects, yet for whom this hadn't been enough. No wonder then, in potent understatement, we learn the thing that David had done displeased the Lord. Why is it when we have so much, we so often want more and almost take leave of our senses? Such can be the strength of desire. As I was talking earlier with our young people over the summer, I greatly enjoyed following events at the Olympic Games in Paris, the pinnacle of sporting endeavor, and a moment to witness and celebrate the all-consuming passion and drive of elite athletes. But I've also been astounded by several stories of athletes for whom the desire to win overwhelmed their sense and their values. Perhaps the most high-profile of these incidents concerned the Canadian women's soccer team, who found themselves engulfed in a sports spying scandal. As one journalist wrote, "This isn't the 48th ranked speed walker in the world getting caught taking banned cold medication. This is a major Canadian team, an Olympic defending champion caught bright red-handed, trying to twist results in their favor. Flying a drone across an opposition team's training session had all the sophistication of King David's drunken dinner and was just as ineffective. Such shallow, shabby cheating for such little purpose, trying to steal advantage from a team they outrank by 20 places. The overall response, embarrassed and awkward, not quite apologies, challenges us all to think about how we respond to moments that demand repentance in our world. How do we respond to these moments in our lives? One answer is hinted at in a story written by an Australian journalist, a parable, if you will, about a man called Ned. Ned died a quiet death, and then he went, not quite, to heaven. He found himself in a room full of switches and dials and gadgets and screens. And then an angel appeared. Her name was Frida. "What is this place?" said Ned to Frida. "This is the place where you edit your life," said Frida. She reached in under her wing and pulled out a large spool of film. "This is the film of your life, every moment, every thought, every deed, good and bad." Ned felt cold, even though he was already dead. "But it's too long," said Frida the angel, "so we will let you cut it down on this machine here." Frida showed Ned how the special editing desk worked. She taught Ned how to add music, do lap dissolves, split screens, and other special effects. She then gave Ned a big black bin into which he should throw the discarded footage. "How long can I make it?" asked Ned, very politely. "Normal feature film length will do," said Frida the angel. "And take your time. You've got plenty of it. Remember, you're in eternity now, so do a good job." Then Frida, the angel, left. Ned couldn't believe his luck. He got straight to work, cutting and splicing his life, and rapidly compiled what he thought was a fair picture of himself. When he finished, he buzzed Frida the angel. "Here is my life," said Ned, proudly presenting her with the final cut reel. Tight and well-paced, and all told, in 98 minutes. "You keep it," said Frida the angel, and she picked up the big black bin. "We judge by the offcuts." That sinking feeling in your stomach, just like the one in mine, is the uncomfortable awareness of a profoundly Christian truth, that we are judged by our regrets, by the quality of our repentance, by its depth and seriousness. As King David was. If you read further in 2 Samuel through chapter 12, you find the details of exactly how God showed David the depth of his wrongdoing and compelled his repentance. And Psalm 51, that Evelyn read for us as well, is often described as David's outpouring of remorse in response to God. "Have mercy on me, O God, according to your steadfast love. According to your abundant mercy, blot out my transgressions. Create in me a clean heart, O God, and put a new and right spirit within me." David's story remains in our Bible because despite everything he had done, when he called out to God for forgiveness and renewal, God forgave David. Because God had promised to care for David and his descendants, and even David's shame would not cause God to break his promise. So God forgave David. Is that too easy? After all David had done, is this an unacceptable example of forgive and forget? I think it helps us wrestle with the dimensions of forgiveness and God's grace. If we recognize that God does not practice forgiveness as a form of spiritual amnesia. When God forgives David, does God absolve David from the consequences of his sin? No, not at all. Did God forget what David had done? Also, no. And we have many, many examples in the Bible that clearly show that God does not forget our transgressions. Forgiveness, then, is not about ignoring the harm caused or saying that the harm is okay. It's about not letting the harm fester in God's heart. The theologian Shaniqua Walker Barnes writes, "Forgiveness is an internal process that we use to transform the negative feelings, including anger, resentment, hostility, blame, fear, and condemnation, towards someone who we perceive as having done wrong." But importantly, she adds, if somebody has harmed us, forgiveness doesn't necessarily mean forgetting, that person may be harmful, especially if they're unrepentant, a predator, or abusive in any way. We see this forgiveness lived out by a British mother, Mina Smallman, in the years following the murder of her two daughters. The women had been the last two present at a birthday picnic back in June 2020 when they were attacked and stabbed to death by a 19-year-old who tragically believed that he had a pact with the devil. Mina's grief has been overwhelming, at times inconsolable, and yet she has also found an extraordinary capacity for forgiveness, both in her head and her heart. Mina knows that giving into anger lets the aggressor harm you twice over. Instead, she pities him. When she was interviewed after his trial, she was asked, "Do you forgive the killer?" And she realized she had. She could, in her words, search her soul and see there was no hatred there. The harm would not fester in her heart. Most days we deal with smaller harms and lesser pain than Mina faced. But that doesn't mean we don't need to draw on forgiveness to heal and restore the relationships in our lives. As the Bible shows us right from the very beginning, relationships are hard. And part of relationship is to forgive over and over, sometimes many times a day. And as we practice forgiveness as a reflection of God's love, we can be encouraged by a poem written by the pastor Steve Garnis Holmes. He writes, "There is a river of forgiveness that flows through you, that sweeps up all hurt and fault and bears it away, that tumbles every memory over cleansing rocks and waterfalls of grace until pain flows into wisdom. There is a stream of renewal that moves beneath your mantle, that never gives up or runs dry, moment by moment, renewed by a source both far beneath you and there above. Let the stream of grace that bathes your feet carry off all resentment, all judgment, all regret. Let this next moment be fresh and new." And as I first read this, I had a moment of almost visceral epiphany. This was not just encouraging me to forgive. It was evoking the forgiveness I have been given, the forgiveness we are given each day by God, that sweeps up all hurt and fault and bears it away, that tumbles every memory over cleansing rocks and waterfalls of grace. Let this next moment be fresh and new. And in this stream of grace, as the psalmist wrote, we are washed thoroughly from our iniquity, renewed with a clean heart, and restored to the joy of salvation, restored to relationship with God. God's steadfast love, God's abundant mercy are shared with us because God treasures us and our relationship with God. God treasures that above all else. In an act of breathtaking love, God will not let our harm fester in God's heart. We are forgiven. Thanks be to God.